You look lost, Jude said, eyeing Peter up and down. What's your story? Peter told Jude about how he had been chased out of his uncle's house and how he had nowhere to go. Jude listened and then smiled. You are lucky we found you, Jude said. We can help you, but you have to join us. Peter frowned. Join you? What do you do? In a peaceful and beautiful town called Ijesha in Lagos State, Nigeria, there lived a barber known as Sapi. Everyone in Ijesha knew Sapi because he owned the most popular barbing shop in the area. People from all over the town and even from faraway places came to his shop to have their hair cut. This shop was always busy, and people often said, Sapi is the best barber in town. From as early as 6 a.m., even before the sun was fully up, people began gathering outside Sapi's shop. They waited patiently for him to open the doors, hoping to be the first in line. Sometimes, Sapi hadn't even arrived yet, but people were already sitting outside his shop, chatting and laughing as they waited. One of his regular customers, Mr. Ade, always made sure to arrive early. He was a tall man with a warm smile, and every time he came to the shop, he would say, Ah, Sapi, you are the only one who can cut my hair just like the way I like it. Sapi would smile back and say, No problem, Mr. Ade. I will make sure you look sharp today. But Mr. Ade was not the only one who thought this way. Many other people also believed that Sapi was the best barber they had ever met. Some people would even travel from far places just to have Sapi cut their hair. They said, Sapi's haircuts are worth the journey. The line of people outside Sapi's shop was always long, and because there were so many people waiting, some of them didn't get their hair cut that day. Instead, they would come back the next morning, joining the queue again, hoping to be seen by Mr. P. One day, a man named Mr. Femi arrived at the shop, looking worried. He had been waiting for 2 days already and still hadn't gotten his hair cut. He walked up to Sapi and said, Sapi, please, I need to look my best for a wedding tomorrow. Can you help me? I have been waiting for 2 days. Sapi looked at him kindly and said, Don't worry, Mr. Femi. I will make sure you get your hair cut today. Just sit down and relax. I will attend to you soon. Sapi was very good at what he did, and he worked quickly. Even though there were many people waiting, he could cut a lot of hair in one day because his hands moved so fast and smoothly. But even though he was fast, Sapi never rushed his work. Every customer who sat in his chair left with a perfect haircut, and that's why people loved him so much. Now, Sapi worked alone in his shop. Some people asked him, Sapi, why don't you hire someone to help you? There are so many people waiting for haircuts, and it might be easier if you had an assistant. But Sapi would always shake his head and say, No, I don't want people lazing around in my shop. I prefer to work alone. This way, I know the work will be done properly. Because Sapi worked alone, he sometimes had to stay in the shop until late at night. There were so many customers, and he didn't want anyone to leave without getting their hair cut. Sometimes, it was almost midnight when Sapi finally finished working, but he didn't mind. He loved his job and always wanted to make sure his customers were happy. As time passed, Sapi's shop became even more popular. People continued to flood the shop every day, and other barbers in the area began to notice. There were other barbers on the same street like Mr. Chuka, Mr. Shegun and Mr. Paul, but their shops were always empty. No matter how hard they tried, people always preferred to go to Sapi's shop. One afternoon, Mr. Chuka stood outside his shop, watching the long line of people waiting at Sapi's door. He shook his head in frustration and called out to Mr. Shegun, who was sweeping the front of his shop. Shegun, have you seen this? Chuka said, pointing to the crowd outside. Every day, more and more people come to him. What is he doing that we are not doing? Mr. Shegun sighed and replied, I don't know, Chuka. It's like magic. People say he's the best, but we are good barbers too. Why doesn't anyone come to us? Mr. Paul, who had been listening from the doorway of his shop, joined the conversation. I have heard people say that Sapi is using charm. That's why his shop is always full. No one wants to come to us because they are under some kind of spell. Chuka raised an eyebrow. Charm? You really believe that? Well, it's what people are saying, Mr. Paul replied. How else can you explain it? Look at us. We are standing here with empty shops, and his shop is overflowing with customers. The three barbers stood together, watching Sapi's shop in silence. Deep down, they were all jealous of his success. They wanted their shops to be as busy as his, but no matter what they did, they couldn't compete with him. Weeks passed, and the rumors about Sapi using charm began to spread. Some people started whispering in the street, have you heard about Sapi? They say he's using something to make people come to his shop. But even though the rumors spread, no one had any proof. And the people of Ijesha didn't seem to care. They loved Sapi and they loved the way he cut their hair. To them, it didn't matter what the other barbers said. All they knew was that Sapi was the best, and they wouldn't go anywhere else. Over time, some of other barbers in the area couldn't take it anymore. Mr. Chuka decided to move his shop to a different part of the town. He said, I can't compete with Sapi. Maybe if I move somewhere else, I will get more customers. Mr. Shegun tried to confront Sapi one day, saying, Sapi, tell me the truth. How do you get so many customers? Are you using something? But Sapi just smiled and said, I'm not using anything, Shegun. I just love my job and I treat my customers well, that's all. After that conversation, strange things started happening. Some of the barbers who confronted Sapi began to fall ill, and others had bad luck. Mr. Paul even lost his shop after a heavy storm blew off the roof. The people of Ijesha didn't know why these things were happening, but they didn't really care. All they knew was that Sapi's shop was still the best place to get a haircut. The years went by, and Sapi continued to run his shop, cutting hair and making people happy. He never let the rumors bother him, and he never stopped doing what he loved, even though the other barbers were jealous. Sapi remained calm and focused on his work. Everyone in the area believed that Sapi was a blessed man. They didn't believe the stories about charm or magic. To them, Sapi was simply a man who knew his onions, a man who was great at what he did. And as long as Sapi's shop was open, the people of Ijesha knew they would always have the best haircuts in town. Life continued as usual in Ijesha, and Sapi's barbing shop remained the busiest place in town. Every day, people still lined up in front of his shop, eager to get their hair cut by the famous barber. But as time passed, something strange began to happen. It all started slowly, and no one noticed it at first. If you came to Sapi's shop with a nice car, the next time you visited, you might come in a keke, a small three-wheeled vehicle. It was as if the people who used to be rich were slowly losing their money. but they still managed to find enough money to come back to Sapi for another haircut. Some people even got sick after getting their haircut, but they would return anyway, saying, I have to get my hair cut by Sapi. The strangest thing of all was that after getting a haircut from Sapi, people's hair started growing back much faster than usual. Normally, it would take weeks for a haircut to grow out, but for Sapi's customer, their hair began to grow back after just 3 days. This meant they had to come back to Sapi again and again. It made them regular customers. Even the young boys in town, who once had bright futures, started to change. Some of them, who had once been known for being smart and hardworking, became lazy and wayward. They stopped going to school or their jobs, and they started wandering the streets. But they never missed an appointment at Sapi's shop. One young boy, Ayo, was a star student before he started getting his hair cut at Sapi's shop. After his first visit, something changed. He stopped paying attention in school and began hanging out with bad friends. His parents were worried and couldn't understand what was happening to him. They tried to talk to him, but Ayo just smiled and said, I'm fine. I just need a fresh haircut from Sapi. It wasn't only the boys. Even the young girls in Ijesha started visiting Sapi's shop. They stopped plaiting their hair and instead went to Sapi to get their heads shaved. When their mothers asked them why they were cutting their hair, they would reply, we don't want to plait anymore. We want Sapi's touch. As more and more people came to Sapi's shop, no one realized that something was terribly wrong. It seemed like everyone who got a haircut from Sapi was losing something important. The rich became poor, the hardworking became lazy, and the healthy became sick. But they all kept coming back for haircuts, as if they couldn't stop. In the middle of all this was a barber named Petron. Petron was a quiet man and a devoted Christian. Unlike the other barbers who had left Ijesha, Petron decided to stay. He was not as famous as Sapi, but he had his own small group of customers who trusted him. Petron noticed that something strange was happening at Sapi's shop. One evening, after his last customer had left, Petron sat in his empty shop, deep in thought. He had been watching Sapi's customers for a while now, and he couldn't help but notice the changes in them. People who used to be full of life now looked tired and drained. Young boys who had bright futures were now lost. Even the big men in the town, the ones who had important jobs, were losing their positions and going broke. Petron shook his head and muttered to himself, this is not normal. Something is wrong, but no one seems to see it. Petron was a man who believed in the power of prayer. He decided to pray about what he was seeing. But the more he prayed, the more he felt that something evil was happening in Sapi's shop. He tried to warn some of his own customers, but they didn't listen. Don't go to Sapi for haircut, Petron told one of his regulars, a man named Tunde. Tunde laughed and said, are you jealous, Petron? Everyone knows Sapi is the best. Why would I stop going to him? Petron sighed and said, it's not about jealousy, Tunde. I have seen things. People are changing and not for the better. But Tunde just shook his head and left. Many others felt the same way. They couldn't see what Petron saw. One evening, after closing his shop for the day, Petron decided it was time to confront Sapi directly. He waited until it was late, and Sapi's shop was empty. Sapi was cleaning up, preparing to go home when Petron walked up to him. Sapi, I need to talk to you, Petron said, his voice calm but firm. Sapi looked up, surprised to see Petron standing there. Petron, what's the matter? It's late. I have noticed something, Sapi, Petron began. People are not the same after they come to your shop. The rich are becoming poor. The healthy are getting sick, and the young boys, they are losing their way. It's like their destinies are being taken from them. Sapi's face darkened, and he put down his broom. What are you talking about, Petron? He asked, his voice cold. I don't know what you are doing, Sapi, Petron continued, but it's wrong. These people trust you, and they are losing everything. You need to stop. You need to give them back their destinies. Sapi's eyes flashed with anger. You have no idea what you are talking about, Petron. Stay out of my business. If you know what's good for you, you will leave this alone. But Petron wasn't afraid. He stood his ground and said, I won't leave it alone. These people need to be saved, and I will keep trying to show them the truth. Sapi took a step closer to Petron and spoke in a low voice. If you don't stay away, you will end up just like the others. Don't make me come after you. Petron didn't flinch. He looked Sapi in the eyes and said, You can threaten me all you want, Sapi, but I will not stop. I will pray for these people, and I will expose you for what you are. With that, Petron turned and walked away, leaving Sapi standing in the dim light of his shop. Sapi watched him go, his face twisted in anger, but deep down, he knew that Petron was not someone who would back down easily. In the days that followed, Petron tried to warn people about what he had seen. He spoke to the young boys, telling them to stay away from Sapi's shop. He spoke to the mothers of the girls, warning them not to let their daughters go to him, but no one listened. Petron is just jealous of Sapi, people would say. He's only trying to spoil his business. Some even went to Sapi and told him what Petron was saying. Sapi would laugh and tell them, Don't worry about Petron. He's just upset that my shop is more popular than his. But Petron didn't stop. He knew that something evil was happening, and he promised himself that he would not rest until Sapi's lies were exposed. For now, he decided to retreat and go into prayer, asking for guidance and strength. He knew that the battle ahead would not be easy, but he was ready. A few days after Petron confronted Sapi, something terrible happened. It was a quiet night, and the streets of Ijesha were calm. People were asleep, and the moonlight cast a soft glow over the town. Suddenly, there was a loud crackling sound, and smoke began to rise in the air. Flames erupted from Petron's small barbering shop. Within minutes, the fire had consumed everything. The shop that Petron had worked so hard to build was burning to ashes. By the time the neighbors noticed the fire and tried to help, it was too late. The entire shop was gone, reduced to nothing but blackened wood and smoldering debris. The people gathered around, whispering and shaking their heads in sadness. One man, Mr. Ade, who was one of Sapi's loyal customers, stood at the scene and sighed. Ah, what a shame, he said to the crowd. Petron was a good man, but it seems his luck has run out. A woman named Mrs. Chidema, who also came to see the fire, added, It's so sad, but maybe he wasn't meant to stay in business. His shop never had as many customers as Sapi's. The next morning, Petron stood in front of what used to be his shop. His heart was heavy and his eyes filled with tears as he stared at the ashes. Everything he had worked for was gone. The scissors, the clippers, the chairs, and even the mirrors all burned to dust. As he stood there, one of his old customers, a young boy named Timmy, came up to him and asked, Petron, what are you going to do now? Petron looked down at the boy, forcing a small smile despite his sadness. I don't know yet, Timmy. But I will keep trusting God. He knows what's best. Petron didn't stay in Ijesha for long after the fire. He was heartbroken and didn't know what to do. But deep in his heart, he knew that this fire wasn't just an accident. He believed it was a result of his confrontation with Sapi. He had seen too many strange things happening around Sapi's shop to believe otherwise. Determined to find answers, Petron packed a small bag and left Ijesha. He didn't tell anyone where he was going. Some people thought he had given up and run away, but Petron didn't run away. He went to the mountains. For weeks, Petron stayed on the mountain fasting and praying. The mountain was a quiet, peaceful place far from the noise of the town. The air was fresh, and the sound of birds singing filled the sky. Petron spent his days and nights in prayer, asking God to protect the people of Ijesha and to reveal the truth about Sapi. He believed that God would show him a way to save the town from the evil that was happening. While Petron was away, life in Ijesha carried on as usual. Sapi continued his business and his shop was as busy as ever. People lined up every morning, waiting to get their hair cut. They praised Sapi for his skills and hard work. They said, Sapi is not just a barber, he's a miracle worker. His haircuts are perfect. But as the days went by, Sapi's life seemed to be getting better and better. Not only did he continue to cut hair, but he also started making big moves. One day, news spread through the town that Sapi had built two beautiful duplexes and a big plaza in the heart of Lagos. He's doing a housewarming ceremony, Mr. Femi said excitedly to his friends one afternoon. Sapi has invited the whole town to celebrate his new houses. How is that possible? Mr. Tunde asked, scratching his head in confusion. How can a man who cuts hair all by himself build such wealth? Duplexes and a plaza? That's not small money. I don't know, another man named Mr. Nduka replied. But we know Sapi is hardworking. Maybe he saved a lot over the years. On the day of the housewarming, the people of Ijesha gathered at Sapi's new house. It was a grand celebration. There was food, drinks and music. Sapi's new house was huge with tall gates and shiny floors. His new plaza was located in one of the busiest parts of Lagos, a place where businesses thrived. Sapi was dressed in fine clothes and stood at the entrance of his new house, smiling and welcoming guests. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, he said as he greeted people. It's been a lot of hard work, but I'm grateful to God for all his blessings. People praised him for his success. Sapi, you are a great man, Mrs. Chidinma said, clapping her hands. You have built all this by yourself. You deserve it. Thank you, madam, Sapi replied, his smile never fading. As the celebration continued, people danced and ate. They didn't think about how strange it was that Sapi, who worked alone cutting hair, had suddenly become so rich. They didn't question how he could build not one, but two duplexes and a big plaza in such a short amount of time. But not everyone was blind to what was happening. Far away on the mountain, Petron was still praying. He had been there for months, fasting and asking God to protect the people of Ijesha. One night, as he knelt in prayer, a feeling came over him, a strange sense that it was time to go back to Ijesha. Petron knew that he couldn't stay on the mountain forever. He had spent months seeking answers and now he felt ready. He was ready to go back to Ijesha and confront Sapi again. This time, he wouldn't be afraid. He had spent enough time in prayer and he believed that God would give him the strength to face whatever came next. Early the next morning, Petron packed his things and began the journey back to Ijesha. The walk down the mountain was long, but Petron felt a sense of peace in his heart. He knew that when he returned to the town, he would have to confront Sapi once more. This time, he would not stop until the truth was revealed. Meanwhile, Sapi continued to enjoy his new life. He had bought a new car, a shiny black SUV, and relocated his family to the rich part of Lagos Island. His wife and children lived in comfort, while Sapi stayed back in Ijesha to run his shop. People praised him for his success, but they never questioned how he had gained so much wealth so quickly. Sapi, you are truly a blessed man, Mr. Ade said one day, as he sat in Sapi's shop waiting for his haircut. You have achieved so much in a short time. We are proud of you. Sapi smiled and replied, it's all thanks to hard work, Mr. Ade. Hard work and dedication. But why people praised him? Their lives are getting worse. Many of the people who came to Sapi for haircuts were still losing their jobs, falling sick or going broke. Yet they kept coming back to his shop, unable to break free from the strange pull that Sapi seemed to have over them. Even the young boys, who had once been full of potential, were wasting their futures. They spent their days wandering the street, but they never missed a visit to Sapi's shop. As Sapi's wealth grew, the people of Ijesha suffered more, but they were too blind to see it. They gathered at his parties, danced at his celebrations, and cheered him on, all while their own lives fall apart. But Petron had not forgotten them. As he returned to Ijesha, he made a promise to himself. I will expose Sapi for who he really is. I will make the people see that he is not the man they think he is. Petron knew it wouldn't be easy. Sapi was powerful, and many people were under his control, but Petron was ready. He had spent months in prayer, and he believed that God would guide him. As he walked back into the town, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was ready to confront Sapi again, no matter what happened next. As soon as he arrived in town, he didn't waste any time. Petron walked straight to Sapi's barbing shop, carrying his Bible in his hand. It was a bright sunny morning, and the streets were busy with people going about their daily lives. The market women were selling their goods, children were playing, and people were already gathered outside Sapi's shop waiting for their haircuts. When Petron reached the entrance of the shop, he stopped. He stood tall, holding his Bible tightly, and he began to pray out loud. His voice was strong and clear, and it carried through the air like a powerful wave. Lord, deliver this town from evil. Petron prayed, his eyes closed and his voice filled with conviction. Expose the darkness that has been hiding in this place. Let the truth be revealed today. As Petron prayed, a strange stillness came over the street. The air grew calm, and it was as if time itself had slowed down. Everyone who had been chatting and laughing just moments before suddenly fell silent. They turned their attention to Petron, watching him as he prayed at the entrance of Sapi's shop. Inside the shop, Sapi was busy cutting a customer's hair. But as soon as Petron's prayer began, Sapi felt a strange sensation wash over him. It was as if something heavy had settled in the air around him, and he couldn't breathe properly. His hands began to shake, and the clippers he was holding slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor with a loud clatter. Sapi looked out of the window and saw Petron standing there praying. A wave of fear rushed through him, and he immediately knew what was happening. He could feel the power of Petron's prayer, and it was shaking him to his core. No! Stop! Sapi screamed, his voice filled with panic. He rushed to the entrance of the shop and stood in front of Petron. Please, stop the prayer, he begged, his hands trembling. Stop it now. But Petron didn't stop. He continued praying, his voice growing even louder. Lord, expose the evil that has been hiding in this place. Set the people of Ijesha free from this darkness. The people standing outside the shop were confused. They didn't understand what was happening. Sapi, the man they had trusted for years, was now begging Petron to stop praying. But why? What was going on? As Sapi's cries grew louder, more people began to gather around. They came from all directions, drawn by the commotion. Soon, a large crowd had formed, and they stood frozen, watching the strange scene unfolding before them. Sapi, the man they all respected, was now on his knees, pleading with Petron to stop. Please, Petron, Sapi cried, tears streaming down his face. Please stop. I will confess. I will tell the truth. Just stop the prayer. The crowd gasped in shock. Confess? Confess what? One man shouted. What is he talking about? Asked Mrs. Chidima, who was standing near the front of the crowd. She looked around at the other onlookers, her face filled with confusion. Petron stopped praying and looked down at Sapi, who was now kneeling in front of him, shaking with fear. He lowered his Bible and spoke firmly. If you have something to confess, then speak now. Tell the truth. Sapi wiped the tears from his eyes and stood up slowly. His face was pale and his hands trembled as he looked around at the crowd that had gathered. He could feel their eyes on him, waiting for him to speak. For a moment, he hesitated, but then he realized there was no escape. The truth was about to come out. Taking a deep breath, Sapi began to speak. I have been using the hair of my customers for rituals, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The crowd gasped again. What? Someone shouted from the back. Sapi continued, his voice shaking. Every day after I finish cutting hair, I collect all the hair from the floor and take it to my coven. The hair is used in rituals that give me wealth. That is why my business has grown so fast, and that is how I built my 2 duplexes and the plaza. The crowd stood in stunned silence. Some of them looked at each other in disbelief. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. One man, Mr. Ade, who had been a loyal customer of Sapi's for years, stepped forward and asked, You mean to say that all the wealth you have gained, all the money you have made, is because of the hair of your customers, our hair? Sapi nodded, tears filling his eyes again. Yes, the ritual I performed made your hair grow back faster, so you would keep coming to my shop. The more you come, the more hair I collected, and the more hair I collected, the more money I made. The people in the crowd began to murmur among themselves, still trying to make sense of what they had just heard. Some of them were angry, while others were simply confused. But why? Asked Mrs. Chidima, her voice trembling. Why would you do such a terrible thing? Sapi looked down at the ground, ashamed. I was greedy. I wanted more than what I had. I didn't want to just be a simple barber. I wanted wealth, power, and respect. So I made a deal with the coven. They promised me wealth in exchange for the hair of my customers. The crowd erupted in anger. You have destroyed our lives, one man shouted. You made us miserable, cried another woman. My son dropped out of school because of you. You are evil, Sapi, a young boy yelled, his fist clenched in rage. Sapi winced at their words, but he knew they were right. He had ruined so many lives, and now the truth was out for everyone to see. As the crowd grew louder, Petron stepped forward and raised his hand. Everyone, please be calm, he said, his voice steady and strong. The truth has been revealed, but we must remain calm. The crowd slowly quieted down, their eyes still fixed on Sapi, who stood trembling before them. Petron looked at Sapi and asked, "Why didn't you hire anyone to help you in the shop? You always worked alone. Was that part of the plan?" Sapi nodded weakly. "Yes, I couldn't afford to hire anyone because if they found out what I was doing, they would expose me. I had to work alone to keep my secret safe. That's why I never allowed anyone to help me. I didn't want anyone to see me collecting the hair." The crowd began to understand now. Everything made sense. Sapi had been so careful to keep his secret, and that's why he had always refused to hire help. He had pretended to be a hardworking barber, but in reality, he had been using their hair to build his wealth. Petron turned to the crowd and spoke again. "I have known for a long time that something was wrong with Sapi's business, but I couldn't prove it until now. The people of Ijesha have suffered because they were blinded by Sapi's wealth and charm, but now the truth is out." Some people in the crowd were still in shock, while others looked angry and betrayed. They had trusted Sapi for years, and now they realized that he had been deceiving them all along. "How could we have been so blind?" Mrs. Chidinma asked, shaking her head. "All this time, we thought Sapi was just a talented barber. We never questioned how he became so rich so quickly." Petron nodded. "Sometimes, when we are too focused on someone's success, we forget to ask important questions. We forget to look closely at where that success comes from." Sapi was not ordinary, but many of you refused to see the signs. One man, Mr. Femi, who had been standing quietly in the crowd, suddenly spoke up. "But what happens now? What happens to all of us who have been going to Sapi's for haircuts?" Petron turned to Sapi, his face serious. "Tell them, Sapi. Tell them what happens to the people whose hair you use for your rituals." Sapi swallowed hard and said, "Everyone whose hair I have taken has been affected. Their lives have become miserable because the rituals took away their good fortune. That's why some of you lost your jobs, fell sick, or went broke. But now that I have confessed, the spell will be lifted." There was a long pause as the crowd took in Sapi's words. Slowly, they began to feel a change. It was as if a heavy weight had been lifted from their shoulders. Some people felt lighter, while others began to remember who they used to be before they started going to Sapi's shop. "I feel different," one man said, looking around in surprise. "I feel like myself again," a young woman added, tears filling her eyes. Petron smiled softly and said, "The truth has set you free, but we must never forget what has happened here today." He then turned to Sapi and asked the question everyone was wondering. "Why, Sapi? Why did you do such evil for wealth? Was it worth it?" Sapi hung his head, unable to meet Petron's gaze. The weight of his actions bore down on him like a heavy stone, and he had no answer. Before he became the well-known barber called Sapi, his real name was Peter Fabian. He was just a young boy from a small village in Akwa Ibom. Life had been hard for Peter from the beginning. When he was only 10 years old, both of his parents passed away. His father had been a fisherman and his mother had sold fruit at the market. They didn't have much, but they were a happy family. However, when sickness came, they couldn't afford the treatment they needed, and soon Peter was left all alone in the world. With no parents to care for him, Peter was sent to live with his uncle in Lagos. He had never been to a big city before, and the bright lights and noise of Lagos were overwhelming. His uncle, Mr. Andrew, was a businessman who lived with his wife and 2 children in a small apartment. At first, Peter thought this new life might be better, But he quickly realized that things were not going to be easy. From the moment Peter arrived at his uncle's house, he was treated like a houseboy. He was made to do all the chores in the house: sweeping, washing dishes, cleaning the bathroom, and running errands. His uncle's wife, Mrs. Grace, was not kind to him. She always yelled at Peter, making him do even more work, while her own children did nothing to help. "Peter!" Mrs. Grace would shout, "why is the floor still dirty? Sweep it again." Peter worked from morning until night, often with very little food. He had to sleep on a small mat in the corner of the kitchen, while his cousins, Solomon and Annabel, had their own comfortable beds. Peter's hands were always sore from scrubbing and cleaning, but he kept quiet because he had nowhere else to go. Peter had once been in school back in Akwa Ibom, but after coming to Lagos, his uncle and his wife stopped sending him to school. "There is no need for you to go to school," his uncle had said. "You are here to help in the house, not to study." Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Peter felt more like a slave than a family member. He missed his parents terribly, but he had no choice but to keep working. One day, something terrible happened that changed Peter's life forever. Mrs. Grace had lost some money from her purse, and she immediately accused Peter of stealing it. "Where is my money, you thief?" she demanded, glaring at him with angry eyes. "I didn't take it," Peter replied, shaking his head. "I don't know anything about it." But Mrs. Grace didn't believe him. She called for her husband, and together they started to beat Peter. His uncle used a thick belt, hitting Peter across his back and legs, while Mrs. Grace slapped him and shouted insults. "You ungrateful boy," Mr. Andrew yelled. "After everything we have done for you, this is how you repay us?" Peter tried to explain that he wasn't the thief, but they didn't listen. It wasn't until later that Peter found out that it was actually Solomon, his cousin, who had taken the money, but by then it was too late. His uncle and aunt had made up their minds. "We don't want you here anymore," Mrs. Grace said coldly. "You are a thief and a liar. Get out of our house." And just like that, Peter was thrown out into the street. He had no money, no food, and nowhere to go. For the first few days, he wandered the streets of Lagos, sleeping on benches or under bridges. He was scared, lonely, and hungry. The city was so big, and Peter felt so small. One afternoon, while Peter was sitting by the side of the road, a group of street boys approached him. They were rough-looking boys, older than Peter, and they were carrying bags filled with stolen goods. One of them, a boy named Jude, sat down next to Peter. "You look lost," Jude said, eyeing Peter up and down. "What's your story?" Peter told Jude about how he had been chased out of his uncle's house and how he had nowhere to go. Jude listened and then smiled. "You are lucky we found you," Jude said. "We can help you, but you have to join us." Peter frowned. "Join you? What do you do?" Jude leaned in closer and whispered, "We are pickpocketers. We steal from people on the street. If you join us, you will never go hungry again." Peter's heart sank. He didn't want to steal. He knew it was wrong, but he was so hungry and he didn't know what else to do. "I don't know if I can do that," Peter said softly. Jude shrugged. "Well, it's either that or starve." Desperate and with no other options, Peter agreed to join Jude and his gang of street boys. At first, Peter was scared. They taught him how to steal wallets and phones without being noticed. He didn't like it, but he felt like he had no choice. One day, while Peter and the other boys were trying to pickpocket a man in a busy market, everything went wrong. The man caught Peter's hand in his pocket and shouted, "Ole! Ole!" which means thief, thief. In seconds, a mob of angry people surrounded Peter and the boys, ready to beat them. Peter's heart raced with fear. The crowd grabbed him and began hitting him. "Burn him! Burn him!" someone shouted. They dragged Peter towards a pile of old tires, preparing to set him on fire. Peter cried out, thinking it was the end. But just then, as they were about to throw him into the tires, the police arrived. The officers broke up the crowd and took Peter and the other boys to the police station. Peter had never been so scared in his life. At the police station, the boys were questioned and Peter's gang of friends managed to bail him out. But instead of feeling grateful, Peter was angry. He wanted to leave the gang. When he told them he was done, they laughed at him. "You think you can survive without us?" Jude sneered. "We use charm to steal. That's why we never get caught. If you don't want to use charm, then you're on your own." Peter shook his head. "I won't do it. I don't want to steal anymore, and I don't want to use charms." The boys didn't care. They threw Peter out, telling him he was no longer welcome with them. Once again, Peter found himself alone on the street. He had no friends, no family, and no home. But he knew he couldn't go back to the life of crime. He had to find another way to survive. For the next few months, Peter did odd jobs to make ends meet. He worked as a bricklayer, carrying heavy blocks in the hot sun. He pushed wheelbarrows full of sand at construction sites. He even cleaned gutters and washed cars for money. The work was hard, and Peter's body ached every day, but he was determined to make it on his own. At night, Peter slept wherever he could find shelter. Sometimes it was under a bridge, sometimes in an unfinished building, and sometimes in the corner of a crowded marketplace. Life was tough, but Peter kept going. Eventually, after saving up a little bit of money, Peter rented a small one-room apartment in Ijesha, a busy neighborhood in Lagos. The room was tiny with just enough space for a bed and a small table, but to Peter, it felt like a palace. It was the first time in a long while that he had a place to call his own. With a roof over his head, Peter decided it was time to learn a skill. He wanted to do something that could help him earn a living without stealing. That's when he decided to become a barber. There was a small barbering shop down the street from his apartment, and Peter asked the owner, Mr. Bello, if he could learn how to cut hair. At first, Mr. Bello wasn't sure about Peter. "You don't look like you have ever held a pair of clippers in your life," Mr. Bello said, looking Peter up and down. Peter nodded. "I haven't, but I'm willing to learn. Please, give me a chance." Mr. Bello thought about it for a moment, then sighed. "All right, I will teach you, but you have to be serious about it. No fooling around." Peter was overjoyed. "Thank you, sir. I won't let you down." For the next several months, Peter learned everything he could about cutting hair. He practiced on anyone who was willing to let him cut their hair. Mr. Bello taught him how to hold the clippers, how to line up the edges, and how to give customers the perfect fade. Peter worked hard, and soon he became quite good at his new skill. When Peter felt confident enough, he used the little money he had saved to open his own barbering shop in Ijesha. It wasn't much, a small dusty room with just one chair and a mirror, but it was his. He named the shop Sapi Barbering Shop and hung a small sign outside. But even though he had learned how to cut hair, things didn't go as smoothly as he had hoped. Days passed and customers were few. People in the neighborhood didn't trust him. They looked down on him because he was young and new to the area. "Why should we go to Sapi when we have so many other barbers in town?" people would say. Peter felt lost. He had tried so hard to change his life, but it seemed like nothing was working. He sat in his empty shop for hours, waiting for customers who never came. His savings were running out, and he didn't know how much longer he could survive. As the days went by, Peter began to grow more desperate. He had done everything right, but nothing was working. He started to wonder if he would ever succeed. Months passed, and Peter's once hopeful spirit had faded into deep sadness. He had tried everything to make his barbering shop successful, but nothing seemed to work. Day after day, he sat in his empty shop, staring at the single chair and the dusty mirror on the wall. He had started this journey with so much hope, but now it felt like a mistake. The people of Ijesha barely noticed his little shop. Other barbers in the area were well established, and no one wanted to give Peter, a young and unknown barber, a chance. The few customers who did come never returned. Peter's heart was heavy with worry. He had no more savings, and it seemed like his dreams were slipping further and further away. One gloomy afternoon, as Peter was sitting alone in his shop, something strange happened. The bell on the door jingled, and an old man walked in. The man had a long white beard that reached down to his chest, and he wore a ragged flowing robe. His skin was dark, and his eyes looked sharp and wise, but there was something unsettling about him. Peter, startled by the man's sudden appearance, quickly stood up and asked, "Good afternoon, sir. Have you come for a haircut or a shave?" The old man didn't smile. He just stared at Peter for a moment before shaking his head slowly. "No, I have not come for a haircut. I have come to help you." Peter was confused. "Help me? What do you mean?" The old man took a seat on the barber's chair, even though he didn't need a haircut, and said, "I have been watching you, Peter. I know you have been struggling. You have been waiting for customers, but they never come. I know that you are tired of life, tired of this shop, and tired of hoping for things to change." Peter's heart skipped a beat. How did this man know his name? And how did he know about his struggles? Peter had never seen this man before, and yet he spoke as if he had been watching him for a long time. The old man continued, "My name is Barber, and I can change your fortune. I can make your shop the most popular place in Ijesha. People will come from all over, lining up just to sit in this chair. You will never be poor again." Peter blinked in surprise. This man, Barber, was saying everything Peter wanted to hear. He wanted success, customers, and a better life. But there was something about the way Barber spoke that made Peter uneasy. "How can you do that?" Peter asked cautiously. "How can you help me?" Barber stroked his long white beard and leaned forward. "There are things in this world that go beyond what you can see, Peter. I can perform a ritual that will bring you customers, wealth, and everything you desire, but there is a price." Peter's heart sank a little at the mention of a price. "What kind of price?" he asked. Barber's voice grew softer, almost like a whisper. "After the ritual, people will come to you in great numbers. They will fill this shop, and you will become rich. But after 7 months, those who come to you will start to lose things. Things that are precious to them, their wealth, their happiness, their success. But they won't stop coming. Their hair will grow back faster than usual, and they will keep returning to your shop. And in exchange, you will collect their hair." Peter frowned. "Their hair?" Barber nodded. "Yes, their hair is the payment. Every time you cut their hair, you will collect it and bring it to me. That is the deal." Peter didn't know what to think. The old man's words were strange and frightening, but at the same time, he was offering Peter exactly what he needed: customers and success. For the first time in months, Peter felt a glimmer of hope, but it was mixed with fear. "I need to think about it," Peter said, his voice shaky. Barber stood up from the chair and nodded. "Of course, but remember, Peter, opportunities like this don't come often. If you are tired of living like this, then you know what to do. I'll be back tomorrow." With that, Barber left the shop, leaving Peter alone with his thoughts. That night, Peter couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about everything the old man had said. A part of him wanted to reject the offer and continue living honestly, but another part of him was tired of struggling, tired of being poor and tired of hoping for things that never came. He thought about all the hard work he had put into the shop, the endless days of waiting for customers, and the disappointment he felt every time someone walked past without even looking at his sign. How much longer could he go on like this? He had already lost so much, and he didn't have the strength to keep going. Maybe this was his chance to turn things around. The next morning, when Baboja returned to the shop, Peter was ready with his answer. I will do it, Peter said, his voice firm but filled with uncertainty. I will agree to the deal. Baboja smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was a smile that sent chills down Peter's spine. Good, Baboja said. You have made the right choice. Now, we'll begin the ritual. The old man led Peter through a series of strange rituals. He gave Peter a small bottle of red liquid and instructed him to sprinkle it around the shop. Then, Baboja lit candles and murmured words in a language Peter didn't understand. The whole room felt heavy, and the air grew thick with an eerie silence. After the ritual was complete, Baboja handed Peter a small black bag. This bag is where you will collect the hair of your customers, Baboja exclaimed. Every night, when you close the shop, gather all the hair and bring it to me. Do not miss a single day, or the deal will be broken. Peter nodded, feeling nervous but determined. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. Just as Baboja had promised, the very next day, something changed. People started coming into the shop, at first just a few, but by the end of the week, there were so many customers that Peter could hardly keep up. He was cutting hair from morning until night, and the line outside his shop grew longer with each passing day. It's a miracle, one man exclaimed as he sat in Peter's chair. I never noticed this shop before, but now I can't imagine going anywhere else. Peter smiled as he walked. The money was pouring in, and for the first time in his life, he felt like he had made it. Every night after the shop closed, Peter gathered the hair from the floor and placed it in the black bag. Then he would take the bag to Baboja, just as he had promised. Months passed and everything seemed perfect. Peter's shop became the talk of the town. People came from far and wide, praising his skills and calling him the best barber in Ijesha. The money flowed in and Peter could afford anything he wanted. He bought new clothes, a fancy watch, and even a new television for his apartment. But despite his growing wealth, Peter never left the small shop. He could have moved to a bigger location or even opened another shop, but he stayed in Ijesha. He couldn't leave, not after everything that had happened there. But as the seventh month approached, things started to change. People began to lose things, precious things. A man who used to come every week lost his job. A young boy who had once been full of energy became sick, and a woman who had been successful in her business suddenly went bankrupt. And yet, they kept coming back, drawn to Peter's shop as if they had no choice. Their hair grew back faster than normal, and they returned week after week, unable to break free from whatever had taken hold of them. Peter knew what was happening. He knew that Baboja's ritual was at work, and even though he felt a twinge of guilt, he didn't stop. He had made a deal, and there was no going back now. Every night, he continued to collect the hair and bring it to Baboja. Years passed, and Peter's wealth grew, but he remained in the same small shop in Ijesha. He could have moved to a bigger house, but he stayed because that was where the ritual had been done. It was where his fortune had begun, and he didn't want to leave. Peter had everything he had ever wanted, but deep down, he knew that it had come at a terrible cost. The people of Ijesha were suffering, and it was all because of him. After Sapi, or Peter Fabian, finished narrating his heartbreaking story, the crowd that had gathered around him stood in silence. The once bustling street of Ijesha was now filled with murmurs of shock, disbelief, and sadness. The truth had been hidden for so long. Then, finally, it came to light. But it came with a heavy price. The people could hardly believe that the man they had trusted for years, the man they had called the best barber in town, had made such a terrible deal with the devil. How could you do this, Sapi? An elderly woman in the crowd asked, her voice trembling with emotion. We trusted you. We brought our children to your shop. We thought you were just a hardworking man. A young boy, one of Sapi's regular customers, looked up at his father and asked, Papa, does this mean Sapi was using her hair for evil? His father nodded slowly, his face filled with sorrow. Yes, my son, it seems so. As the crowd murmured and whispered, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had just learned, Sapi fell to his knees, clutching his head. His body shook and he let out a scream so loud that it sent chills through everyone standing nearby. Baboja! Sapi cried, his eyes wide with fear. I see him. He's here. The crowd watched in horror as Sapi pointed towards the empty air, as if the old man Baboja was standing right in front of him. But no one else could see the old man. Only Sapi could see the terrifying figure that had haunted him for years. No, please, I did everything you asked. Sapi screamed again, his voice breaking with fear and regret. I kept my end of the deal. Don't take everything from me. But it was too late. Sapi's body shuddered as he collapsed onto the ground, his eyes staring blankly at the sky. The crowd gasped in shock, but no one moved. They were frozen, too stunned by what they had just witnessed. He's gone, someone whispered. He's dead, another person said softly. The people of Ijesha stood in silence, staring at the lifeless body of the man they had once called Sapi. He had made a deal with the devil, and now he had paid the ultimate price. His sudden death was a stark reminder that the devil's wealth always comes with destruction. As they stood there trying to make sense of everything, a loud crackling sound came from the distance. People turned their heads towards the direction of the sound, and to their horror, they saw thick black smoke rising into the sky. Sapi's two duplexes, the ones he had built with the wealth he had gained from the ritual, were engulfed in flames. The beautiful houses that had once stood as symbols of his success were now burning to the ground. The fire! Someone shouted. His houses are on fire. More people ran towards the scene, but there was nothing they could do. The flames were too strong, and within minutes, both duplexes were reduced to ash. The fire spread quickly, and soon, the plaza that Sapi had built in the heart of Lagos was also consumed by flames. The crowd stood in stunned silence, watching as everything Sapi had built was destroyed before their very eyes. It was as if the deal he had made with Baboja was coming back to haunt him, even in death. They say the devil's wealth never lasts, Mr. Femi said quietly, shaking his head. And now, we see that it's true. Sapi's family, who had once lived in luxury, were now left with nothing. His wife and children stood in shock, watching as their home and all their possessions were turned to ash. In a matter of minutes, everything they had gained was gone. As the fire continued to burn, the people of Ijesha realized the full extent of what had happened. They had been blinded by Sapi's success, never questioning how a simple barber could have gained so much wealth so quickly. They had trusted him, never knowing that every visit to his shop had cost them more than just a haircut. This is what happens when you make deals with the devil, an elderly woman in the crowd said solemnly. The devil always comes to collect his due. With heavy hearts, the people of Ijesha gathered around Sapi's barbing shop, the place where it had all begun. The small shop, once filled with customers and laughter, now stood empty and cold. The people of Ijesha knew what had to be done. We must burn it down, Petron said, stepping forward. We cannot let this place stand any longer. It is a reminder of the evil that was done here. The crowd agreed, and soon they gathered sticks and dry grass. They set the shop on fire, watching as the flames consumed the building. As the fire burned, it felt like a weight was being lifted from the town. The spell that had held them all captive for many years was finally broken. As the last of the flames died down, Petron stood in front of the crowd and spoke softly. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Greed and evil may seem tempting, but in the end, they bring nothing but destruction. Sapi thought he could gain the world, but he lost everything. The people of Ijesha nodded in agreement. They had learned a hard lesson that day, a lesson they would never forget. Sapi's story had ended in tragedy, but the people of Ijesha were finally free. The evil that had plagued their town for so long had been defeated. As the crowd began to disperse, some of them looked back at the ashes of the shop, reflecting on all that had happened. They knew that life in Ijesha would never be the same, but they also knew that they had been given a second chance. Sapi's story was over, but the people of Ijesha had a new beginning. They will rebuild their lives, but this time they would do it the right way, with honesty and hard work, knowing that true wealth comes from within. This story teaches us that greed and dishonesty always lead to trouble. Sapi wanted to become rich quickly, so he made a bad deal with an evil man. Even though he became rich, the deal he made hurt a lot of people, and in the end, he lost everything. The story reminds us that it's important to work hard and be honest, even if it takes time to succeed. The easy way may seem tempting, but it can lead to destruction. We should always choose to do the right thing, no matter how hard it gets. Thank you so much for watching this amazing story about Sapi on African Stories. Please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.